And good evening, everybody. It's the Old Soldier coming at you this evening from Robeson County, North Carolina, where it has been a cold and wet, rainy day. I hope everybody's doing well tonight. I hope you've enjoyed your weekend. And I hope everybody's well prepared for next week to get fat and happy. We around the Old Soldier's household are looking forward to it. We're going a little non-traditional. Instead of doing turkey, we're doing Cornish hens and a ham. So I think last year we did roast beef. And for Christmas, we did steak and baked taters. I think we're going to do steak and baked taters for Christmas this year, too. Why? Because I like steak and taters. Not that I don't like turkey. Turkey's good. Just it seems like after Thanksgiving or Christmas, you got a lot of it left over, and nobody wants to take any of it home with them. I just didn't feel like being stuck with bag on bag on bag on bag on bag on bag on top of a bag of turkeys. So it is what it is. Walter, good evening, sir. How you doing? Glad to have you with us tonight. And Free Spirit, if you see this later in rerun, I appreciate you dropping off a comment, and I appreciate you for your. And wanted to say thank you for your comment. I try my best. Hopefully I don't disappoint. But anyway, folks. I'll wait a few more minutes, see who else joins in. But like I said, we're anxious and awaiting Thanksgiving to get here next week. Mostly everybody's anxious just for some much needed time off and away from the grind and the hustle. Hey, Steve, you made it this evening. Good to have you with us, sir. How are things out in California? And folks, of course, there are attorneys because he lives in California. Sometimes the time constraints keep him from being with us. But I'm glad to have you here with us tonight, Steve. Appreciate you stopping in. Really do. So we've got 4 up on the chat. We got New York Outcast. Good to have you with us. What are we cooking? Maybe I'll drive up and have a bite. Not the hoop practice, Steve. You coaching or you playing? But it's good to have each and every one of you here this evening. Like I said, we'll read a little bit of poetry and talk about whatever you folks want to talk about tonight. Lord knows there's nothing in the news going on there. Bacon for BLTs. Well, save me one. I'll be up there in 6 or 7, 8, 9, or 10 hours. But when it says New York Outcast, helper one. Helper one. I like that one. I'm going to have to remember that one, Steve. Helper one. Gotcha. Oh, how many helpers do you have? Mine are all grown. Oh, but anyway. Well, we had Veterans Day last week, and I think we had a pretty good turnout on it. We had a whole lot of veteran-inspired poems. And so after Veterans Day, I was kind of inspired to write one that come to mind that there's Flanders Fields that talks about poppies. And I read that one, but decided, well, here in the U.S., we don't do it as prominent, if you will, as the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth nations, but we do show our support with buddy poppies. Many of service organizations, such as the Disabled American Veterans and the VFW and the American Legion and the American Veterans, give them out usually at Veterans Day or Memorial Day. You see them at front of the Walmarts, whatever stores they go to. And sometimes they'll hand out a brochure telling the meaning about the Buddy Poppy, that kind of thing. But traditionally, you would wear them on the lapel of your Sunday coat or your Sunday suit, if you will. And I just, it inspired me to write what I'm going to read to you tonight, which is a new one. This is not one of my books, but this will be in the third book once I start working on it, as I'm still putting together some more material for it. But the name of this poem is "The Poppy on My Lapel." And again, like I said, I was kind of inspired about the whole thing behind Buddy Poppies. But how many children today could tell you what the Buddy Poppy is? What does it mean? What's it represent? How did it come into being? As far as recognition for those that have served and those that have died in service. So, but it goes to read: "The poppy on my lapel. You ask why I wear it. What does it mean, the poppy on my lapel? Well, this is what I will say. This is what I will tell you. There once was a great war, one fought to end all others. Horrific battles were fought, millions of lives lost, over ground contested time and time again. Then there was Flanders Fields, a battle so terrible, so many lives lost. The soldiers' blood saturated the soil. Once the dead were buried and the land begun to heal, up between the marble markers, the poppies, they did appear. A young man, a Canadian Army physician, Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae, wrote a famous poem, In Flanders Fields. It speaks of the dead before they died that day, to those who lived to live another day. Years later, veterans began to wear them to remember those who died in battle, their last full measure given. In places such as Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, Great Britain too, it is worn to honor and remember on Remembrance Day. In the United States, we wear it as a symbol to remember those who perished. We wear it on Veterans Day and Memorial Day too. It has become a symbol almost worldwide to never forget those who died for our freedom. Tragic this may seem, and sad and somber it is. This we must continue, lest we forget. The sacrifice of many, generations forever scarred, so much innocent blood spilled, the folly of youth lost. So next time you see someone wearing a poppy on the lapel, you can tell them why. Better yet, and better still, affix one to your lapel, humbly honor and humbly remember. Tell the story, recite the meaning of the poppy on my lapel. Hope you like that, ladies and gentlemen. Hi, Miss Vanessa. Glad to have you with us this evening, young lady. I hope all finds you doing well. But hope you all like that one. But yeah, Flanders Field was a very horrific battle in World War One. I mean, the majority of the battles fought in World War One were very horrific. What's what I'm looking for? The generals didn't use a whole lot of common sense when things finally stagnated. And they just went back to sheer brute force as a measure of trying to fight battles, I guess you'd say. Things got so bad that the French army at some point in time during the war mutinied because of just countless and needless bloodshed. Thank you, Walter. I appreciate that, sir. But in all wars and all battles, there's good leadership, there's bad leadership. The Korean War. A lot of people, we don't talk about the Korean War as much as I think we ought to. Towards the end of the war, when, well, he's not technically, it's still not over, but towards the ending days of the conflict to where before the armistice was signed, you know, there was pointless and fruitless battles fought on the ground just to basically prove who the biggest, toughest kid on the block was. Just to say, well, we held the last piece of ground when we signed a piece of paper that ended the conflict. But who wants to be told that you're going to be the last person that dies in this war for what, a hill on an imaginary line on the ground? There's a good movie that talks about that. It's called Pork Chop Hill. Gregory Peck plays the company commander of this, loosely based on true accounts of it was the last company to go on the line to fight. They were given an order to take a hill and hold it. And the Chinese, along with their North Korean allies, basically tried to push back and take the hill. And the ground itself had no real tactical nor strategic value, let alone any other value, because already all blown to pieces anyway. But it boiled down to, at the end of the day, who was going to hold this last piece of ground, and what was each side willing to give up to gain that. And that's why that is a part of Flanders Fields. You know, that the whole thing about World War I was it was a war to end all wars. Sadly, it wasn't. Yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head there, Walter. But it just, you know, the tactics of World War One, given also it's like any other war, advances in technology. I mean, our own Civil War, we saw jumps, leaps, and bounds in technology that made the battlefield much more deadly. Now, some of that stemmed from things that they had found out during our war with Mexico. Our war with Mexico is kind of a prelude to our Civil War as far as the tactics and the strategy would be used. Back when in the armies, your engineers were the prominent branch of service, because engineers did more than just build and construct. They scouted out routes, paths, how to set up defensive positions in certain types of terrain, coastal fortifications, things like that. Which Robert E. Lee was actually an engineer. People have a tendency to forget that. That's what made him such a commodity to the Confederate Army when he was asked to be the general of the Confederacy, Confederate Army. His knowledge as an engineer, he knew how to plan and fight over terrain that was beneficial to his troops versus the other guys. But at the end of the day, in World War One, generals would just take that hill or take that trench. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Steve. And sadly, almost every major nation in the world still kind of fights wars that way. There was an old adage in the U.S. Army that we trained for the last war we fought. But the problem is the last war we fought is not exactly what we're going to encounter in the future per se. Case and example, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. I'm not going to say we were woefully inadequately prepared for them, but when it came to fighting an insurgency, we were a little out of touch with that. Then with the advent of, and I say the advent, IEDs have been around ever since you can make things that go boom. But with the Iraqi insurgency, the use of IEDs to hit soft skinned vehicles, that kind of thing. That was something we could have taken lessons from South Africa on as far as how we developed our vehicles. South Africa and Zimbabwe, which was formerly known as Rhodesia, had vehicles for years special built for that. I get what you're saying, Steve. But But yeah, and again, like I said, it was inspired by the Flanders Fields. At the end of the war, they buried, that was the other thing too. A lot of World War I battlefields were turned into mass cemeteries for a lot of the casualties. Back then, they just didn't have the embalming technology we got today, no transportation today. That's why there's a cemetery in Belgium and in France that interns U.S. service members. A lot of people don't realize there's still one in Tunisia that from World War II that's a U.S. cemetery, and it's there for all those that died in the North African campaign of World War II. Towards the end of the war, it started being where they could bring the remains back home. In this day and age, you wouldn't dream of burying your dead on foreign soil. They'll fly the remains back home regardless. But back then, they just, they didn't have the means to get them back in a timely manner. So a lot of times there'd be a site selected. And see, that's the other thing, World War II, when service members, there was already a cemetery in France where U.S. service members were buried. There was monuments to units that had fought. And now this ground was recontested again. And what people don't realize about World War I, there were large battles that were fought prior to World War I between, I want to say it was Croatia and Serbia were at war with each other. Might have been Croatia and Bulgaria. I had to go back and look, but they had rather large armies for the time. Both of them had close to 500,000 men on each side, and they were fighting these large battles. That's the other thing about World War I. We're talking about a war where large armies fought. Our American Civil War, the largest clash would have been about 80,000 to 60,000 at any given time. World War I, you're talking about 500,000 here, 500,000 there going up against each other. There's going to be casualties. The other thing, too, with World War I, artillery had become extremely devastating with high caliber, high explosive, high velocity artillery rounds. The ability to fire artillery without the artillery having to see the target, or indirect fire capabilities. And it was kind of in its infancy during World War I, but the fact that the artillery could be far behind the lines and engage targets based on someone observing and adjusting. And we're talking about these shells these massive guns that just devastate formations as they were coming across the field. And that was the other thing. They'd get up out of their trenches, these massive charges, and then this artillery would come in. And if anybody made it through the barrage and they got up to where the enemy was, then you had machine guns. And the Germans had the maximum machine gun. The British had their 303 Vickers. Was one the French had in prominence. Well, Hotchkiss made some of theirs, but the Maxim was used to deadly effect against the British and their allies out of the trench. That's the other thing too. The initial British expeditionary force that went over was only 250,000 men. Why? Because the British Empire at the time depended on all their colonial assets to provide armies, of which people don't have forgotten. The British Indian Army was probably the largest army formation in Southeast Asia at the time. And it was a very substantial army, and the King of England could call on them. Yeah, well, it absolutely was. Even the Spanish-American War, belt-fed machine guns were coming into their own. A lot of people don't realize that there were some that were actually used during the Spanish-American War to deadly effect. Of course, we started with the Gatling gun, Hiram Maxim, developed the Maxim gun. Then there was the Vickers. There's a whole lot of other manufacturers that started coming out with them. Browning even made one that went over with the American Armed Forces. They called it the Potato Digger, which was not a bad machine gun, but it wasn't as advanced as the Vickers or the Maxim. And eventually Browning would make the 30 caliber water cooled machine gun, and then eventually the 50 caliber heavy barrel machine gun would come down along the line. But those developments, well, World War One also saw the introduction of the first submachine gun. Hand grenades came back into prominence in World War One. Trench mortars, another deadly weapon of war. And these all caused, I mean, just severe, extreme casualties. And that's not counting the chemical warfare that we saw used in World War One. I think there's still places today that you have to be very careful about disturbing the ground in Europe because of the fact that mustard gas, there's still areas where mustard gas, where the remnants are still persistent. Persistent agents. That's scary for a chemical to be able to last over that length of period of time. Not to mention unexploded ordnance that even over time that might be covering up by debris and other things. Oh yeah, Walter, absolutely. The whole let's get out of the trench and fix bayonets and charge head on. Yeah, belt-fed machine guns really, change that. And honestly, when one side couldn't get the advantage over the other, that's how they kind of got into the whole trench warfare thing, and it stagnated. And the other thing about that part of Europe, when fall and winter sets in and the rains start to come, oh yeah, of course, and Winchester, Winchester, the 1897 Winchester trench gun. I'd love to get my hands on. There's a company that makes a reproduction. I think Ithaca makes a reproduction of it with the whole air jacket on top of it, the bayonet lug. I'd love to get my hands on it just to have. But yeah, shotguns were a phenomenal trench weapon because you could hit more than one target when you got into the trench. And the fact that you could cycle through round after round much quicker than, say, the bolt action rifle. Yeah. But see, the Germans would issue theirs the Mauser machine pistol, which the holster could be used as a stock. Wood holster came with, could be used as a stock, and basically in effect, it could make it into a rapid firing pistol that when they got in the trenches, But we also saw the reintroduction of medieval weapons like maces. There were several examples of both the British and Americans and the Germans making trench maces, out of whatever they could find. And you get in the trench and knock somebody upside the head with those things, you can kill them. I've got a book around here somewhere that shows a picture of some of them, if I remember where I put it, of some of these weapons that they use. But yeah, shotguns, because they could be used to deadly effect in the trenches if you got that far. That was the thing, getting up to the trenches. And then one of the things people started doing was, okay, we'll advance at night. The British like to use what was called the rolling barrage. Artillery would start firing in front of their lines and roll forward, and then their troops were supposed to get up right behind it. And what they found out was it might make muck of the initial frontline trenches, but the bunkers, they weren't doing nothing to the German bunkers. So when they got up to what was left of the trenches, the Germans would come spilling out of them bunkers and be ready for them by the time they got to the top of them. And again, to devastating effect, the machine gun would come back into action and just eradicate whole formations. And I want to say it was the Battle of the Somme, or it might have been Ypres. It was YPRES. I can never pronounce it in the French pronunciation of it, but that particular battle, something like 500,000 people died in that one day. But World War I was so devastating for Europe. The birth rate dropped for almost 15, 20 years because of the number of soldiers who died. Well, I remember reading of that, but I can't think of his name to save my life right now. But you talk about that, the French generals were just arrogant. They just thought, well, you were a soldier. Will do, Steve. Thanks for stopping in, my friend. Appreciate you making it tonight. And good luck at the practice with helper number 1. But you take care, Steve, and we'll see you soon. But yeah, the French generals had an arrogance about them. Their whole thought process was that the enlisted soldier of their army, hey, what's up, Warsaw? The enlisted soldier of the French army was somewhat inferior to the officer class, if you will, and that they had a obligation to obey whatever orders were given of them, regardless of how stupid they might be. And like I said, towards the end of the war, that's what caused a mutiny within the French army. And there were several conspirators in that mutiny that were court-martialed. And finally, the French people got wind of what was going on, and the government got involved, if you will. And finally, there were reforms that were made. And things started to get a little better for the French. And that was more for their army that was conscripted from within France, not so much their foreign or colonial forces that they brought in to fight. That's the other thing people don't realize. World War I, several of the European countries still had colonial empires that they ruled and governed, and each one of those had armies that they brought in. The French brought soldiers from North Africa, Central Africa, Southeast Asia into the fight. Great Britain brought soldiers from Africa and India into the fight. Oh, you're absolutely right, Warsaw. The French don't want to give us any recognition in our fight for independence from the British. And when they did, the Spanish stepped in and helped out too. And they came in and aided and assisted us in our bid for independence. That also played in their hands too, because they were already I'm not sure what you're asking or saying there, DPFX 99999. But yeah, the French resistance did help our people in World War II a good bit, especially D-Day. And it's sad that, it's sad that the French resistance had to be stood up the way it was. Just the fact the way Germany rolled into France during World War II. But if it wasn't for the French resistance, a lot of our air crews would have never got out of the country after being shot down. That's all right. I was trying to make sure I was getting the gist of what you're trying to say, my friend. And by the way, I think it's the first time I've seen you on the channel. Welcome. Glad to have you with us. Yeah. Now, Polish had resisted. Now, Warsaw, when they finally had the Warsaw Uprising, Warsaw. The sad part was there was a Soviet army within a stone's throw, and because of politics, didn't lend a hand, and that's what caused that rebellion to be squashed. Had that been successful, it could have changed how things ended in World War II. I think that's just my opinion. But because the Soviet Union didn't care for the government that was in that would have been established, they didn't want to lend a hand. It's sad. Thousands and thousands of people died because of politics, but that's wars for you. Needless to say. All right. You could actually go past, before 1920s. Poland's always been kind of contested ground between Prussia and Russia and the various nations throughout time in history. What a lot of people don't realize, it was the Poles that kind of saved Europe from the Muslim invasions of the time back in the I'm trying to think of the time frame. Thank you, dear.
You're welcome, dear.
I'm trying to think of the time frame.
Can you go pee-pee? Okay, I'm gonna let him out.
Oh, one of those moments where CRS is in effect, folks. My apologies, but it was a Polish cavalry. Yeah, Warsaw hit the nail on the head. 1,400 and Polish cavalry saved the day. A lot of people have forgotten that. I think it was right prior to the fall of Constantinople, or Vienna, correct? Vienna. I was thinking Constantinople had already fallen, but yeah, the siege of Vienna, the winged hussars came in and saved the day. But everybody forgets about that one, don't they, Warsaw? Okay. Well, again, like I said, we're glad to have you with this. I'm just going to call you DP for short, if that's cool. But we are glad to have you with us tonight. And feel free to drop in on Monday night, any Monday night that we're out working broadcasting. Like I said, normally I'll read a poem or two and we talk and just have a good old time. But yeah, talking about World War One. Like I said, technology that was developed during that war was just amazing. Some of it was downright scary, though. But I think every war we see the technological advances pushed because of the war. You go back to the American Civil War, we were still using muzzle loading rifles during the war on both sides. Yeah, you're right, Walter. Awesome, Warsaw. Cool. It's honor and a privilege, DP. Honor and a privilege. We went into the American Civil War with breech loading rifles. I mean, muzzle loading rifles. Well, we started to see the development of some breech loading rifles and then repeating rifles. Case an example, one of the most prominent to come out of the Civil War was the Spencer rifle. But the Henry saw service in limited numbers during the Civil War. And what it was, I can't remember the name of the Union commander, but he basically outfitted his entire regiment with Henry rifles, which gave them a marked advance on the battlefield. If I'm not mistaken, Henry rifle holds seven rounds in its tube, and therefore, as fast as they could crank them off. But yeah, and but we saw the use of revolving pistols come into prominence during the Civil War. Various models of them, to what they call pin-fired cartridges. Warsaw, that doesn't surprise me. Doesn't surprise me. You're talking about a country that is banned firearms, has now banned knives. I'm not surprised that they haven't issued a law where you have to have a permit to buy a cricket bat yet. Got to be the next thing somebody's going to beat the snot out of somebody with over there because he can't get a knife. But that doesn't surprise me for having a potato peeler outside of a kitchen or something and somebody got arrested for having it. It just doesn't. But back to the whole weapons development stuff, like I said, the American Civil War, we saw the advent of the Gatling gun come into play. Yeah, DP, you're right about that too. We also saw artillery that went from muzzle loading to breech loading. Now, for artillery, that's that saves a tremendous amount of time on reloading, when you can put the shell and the powder in from the breech versus the muzzle. Longer range guns were in play. We saw the advent of armored naval vehicles for the first time, or ironclads as they called them. That brought its own set of pros and cons to the battlefield, if you will. We saw the advent of using designated marksmen, i.e., Berdan's rifles. It's a sharpshooter regiment. Okay. And they used a breech loading rifle. So again, advances in technology usually occur during war. To one good effect, if you will, of the hard tragedy war is always the advances in medical technology. We saw multiple advances during the American Civil War. The discovery that sanitation, cleaning of instruments and tables. Later on, we'll see in World War I other advances. Eventually, we see the development of the antibiotics, and right on down the line. I mean, sadly, the current wars that the U.S. has been involved in has seen the prosthetic industry jump by leaps and bounds. And those things can be carried into the civilian population with those advances in technology. So, but how's everybody doing this evening? I've been doing a lot of talking. I see we've got 6 people watching. So, but like I said, we've cranked out one poem for this evening. Who wants to hear another one? Sound off real quick check. Anybody up for another poem? Yes, no, maybe so. See if I can find a good one for you. The old soldier's poetry and prose. Life, love, and liberty. Well, how about we just read of life? Of life, love, and liberty. All right, Walter, you're on board. Good deal. But this is the title of the poem, Of Life, Love, and Liberty. We live our lives day to day, week to week, month to month, year by year. Through it all, we stumble, we fall, skin our knees a time or two, maybe even more. Who knows? At some point in time, we find love in one or two or more in the life we live. That is usually the score. We wish, we hope, we pray, we cope, struggle and fight, sometimes to all hours of the night, that we might. Then one day comes, all seems in doubt. Thoughts and recollections, groggy and muddied, things are cloudy and unclear. Freedom of thought and expressions of love is what we sought, but now seems gone, a forlorn thought. Our expressions sour, we cannot fathom that idea of losing our ability of movement, of life, love, and liberty. There's a lot of things that we're going to encounter in life, folks, that will... Hello, Billy Bob. Good to have you with us, sir. We're going to face these things in life, folks. Aches, pains, disease, things that will tax us every day. Challenges we'll face. The one thing my mama was glad that she didn't lose before God called her home was her mind. That was what she was most afraid of, was losing her sanity and her cognitive ability before she died. She could deal with the pain of not being able to breathe very well. Yes, sir, DP. God bless America. 100%, my friend. Thank you. I've had 2 aunts that have succumbed to the effects of Alzheimer's. I've had several relatives, to include a brother, who have died of cancer. My father died of a heart attack. He'd had heart disease for many years. I myself suffer from several maladies. But it's a part of life. It's things we're going to have to learn to cope with, deal with. We're all going to experience it at some point in time. But we all value and cherish life, love, and liberty. And if you think about it, when you get older and older and older, that's one thing when I was active with the VFW post I was a member of, we'd go visit the Veterans Nursing Home in Fayetteville. And the one thing that some of the people in the facility, you could kind of tell were upset about or sad about, was the ability to just get up and walk out of that place and do what they want when they want it. Because they couldn't care for themselves. That's why they wound up where they're at. And that's one of my biggest fears, being to a point that my children might have to put me in a facility someday. I pray that day never comes, but only the Lord knows if that'll happen or not. And again, like I said, those are just some of the challenges we face in life. Heartbreak too. I think if we go through this life without at least one heartbreak, something's wrong. You learn, you grow from it. But anyway, yeah, you're right, Warsaw. It is. I lost my daddy when I was 20, when I was stationed in Germany. Lost my mom 20 years after that. My brother 2 years after that. But that, again, like I said, that's part of life. We go through these things. All of us do. But the other thing too about life, love, and liberty, governments can be intrusive. And currently, our own nation, we are slowly to moderately seeing many of our rights being eroded, restricted, challenged. Our Second Amendment rights constantly being challenged, if you will. We also have a movement in the U.S. that we've got a certain group of politicians and those seeking political office seem to think that we'll promise everybody free everything. But by all means, Warsaw, add to it. Add to it, my friend. But they're wanting to stand on these promises of giving out free tuition, free medical care, free this, free that. The problem is, it's not free. Somebody's got to pay for it. The money's got to come from somewhere. So what are their plan? We'll tax. We'll add more taxes. Okay, well, we're going to do that, and we're going to get to a point like France, where 60% of the population is either retired or doesn't work, and the other 40% are taxed darn near to death, it seems like. That's why so many people have left certain, industries from over there. Well, Warsaw, that's politicians for you. They're going to say one thing and do another. Oh, DP, yeah, but everybody needs a helping hand from time to time. And I'll say this to say that. If you put your hand out, I can feed you for a day if I give you a loaf of bread. But if you put your hand out and I pick you up and I take you to the kitchen and I show you how to make that bread, I can feed you for a lifetime. And Jesus even so much stated that if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, but if you teach him how to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. Which there's some deeper meaning to that too. But what he was also referring to is you help people up, and then you show them how. But if you continue to, and you make a valid point there, and sadly that's what has happened in this nation in a lot of ways. A lot of programs have been abused. They've been abused to the point that people have made it a lifestyle instead of trying to work their way out of it. And the government has not been of any help and helping them work out of it. Instead, they just add more and more onto it to the point that they have no incentive to get out of it. I get a check every month from the government. They take care of this, they take care of that. Why do I need to leave what I'm doing? And so the incentive to be more than what the government is allowing them to be, a lot of times keeps people in that particular environment. Again, I'm not knocking anybody has reached out for a helping hand. I've been there. Okay. Been there more than once. That's what I've heard, Billy Bob, and I don't wish that on anybody that lives in New York, but I do understand it's the highest tax state in the union. I know people that come down from New York to North Carolina to buy cigarettes just because of the amount of taxes that are on cigarettes in New York State. And then I've also heard that if you live in New York City, it's even worse. Under the current mayor and the one previous to him. I I don't know how anybody in New York does it. I think I was listening to Sean Hannity a few weeks ago, and he was just talking about the number of people that he knows that's moving out of New York. So I don't know where they're moving to, but he was seeing a lot of people are moving out, and a lot of businesses, he said, we're starting to consider pull up out of New York. Well, DP, you're absolutely right too, and that's the other thing too. The government has restricted what churches can do now. There used to be a time where you went to your church first before you went anywhere else. But now it seems like it's almost a taboo thing to do. I don't have the entire answer on why that is. But a part of it too is liability, from what I hear from the church end of things. A lot of churches don't want to do that anymore because of liability, because they're held to, well, case example, the church decides they're going to open up a feeding program. Well, now they got to comply to all the laws that's applicable to somebody's opening a restaurant. I get that to an extent. But at the same token, if a church says, I'm going to feed you today, and they bring you in, they feed you, and then the government comes by and says, well, where's your permit? Where's this, that, and the other? And the churches have allowed that to happen, I think, instead of standing united and saying, we are a body of Christ. We're going to do this without your permission or with it, either way it goes. But they have backed down from the government. Luke Dog, my brother, what's going on? Folks, if you don't know, Luke Dog and I were kids together in East Point, Georgia. We used to, and I'm embarrassing Luke Dog here, I'm sure, but dear friend, always have been, always will be. But we used to play a lot together in our backyards. Everything from Army, Navy, Cowboys, and Indians to baseball, football, and anything else between. Well, Warsaw, that's a good question. That's a hard one to answer. I would say though that in communities across the nation today, the churches need to come together and do something. See, World War II. I'm gonna give you an example. World War II. Churches did a lot of the raising of things to get sent overseas to the soldiers and service personnel that were serving overseas. There was no question asked when they did what they did. Okay. People go into the congregations and ask people to support war bonds. And if anybody knows what those are, bonds they sold World War II to help fund the war effort. And at the end of the war, you could cash them back in and have a little profit off of them. Warsaw, you're right about that. Tithes and offerings are supposed to go to God. Jesus even told us, when it was asked about the picture of Caesar on the coin, he said, give unto Caesar what's Caesar and give unto God what's God's. But there used to be a time where pastors didn't have so much of a salary because the church provided their meals, their parsonage, and a lot of churches now don't even have parsonages. So they had to factor in that cost of living to a pastor's salary. A lot of times pastors don't have health care, so that's factored into their salary. That's another dynamic that's changed. Yeah, they were DP. They really were. But also in World War II, you had a lot of rationing going on. I remember my mom talking about, because her daddy was a farmer, he was allowed 2 additional gallons of gasoline per week as opposed to somebody that did something else. I forget the reason why. Police officers were allowed X amount more, but sugar was rationed. There were drives to collect scrap metal because all that was needed for raw materials for the war effort. Scrap leather. If you had scrap leather, you were encouraged to turn it in. That's the other thing. New shoes. It was hard to get new shoes because leather was, it was a priority for the war effort. I'm trying to think what else she said was rationed, but she said there's a lot of things that were rationed. But if you could raise your own, that's the other thing. People were encouraged to grow victory gardens. So they did. That helped compensate, or not compensate, but it helped offset the things they couldn't buy in the grocery stores by growing their own victory gardens. And even the people in the urban environments could grow one on the tops of, the rooftops of their buildings. And DP, you hit the nail on the head. Everyone did pull together. To pitch in. But, the dynamic changed after World War II. Why? Because of advances in technology. Okay. After World War II ended, and all the soldiers and Marines and sailors, they all came back home. They were all expecting jobs when they got out. Many of them didn't have the skills, so they had the GI Bill. Technology increased with the advent of electric refrigerators. They were kind of coming out before World War II. Long story short, after World War II, you saw what was, supermarkets started to become popular and pop up all over the place. We had a massive growth, and again, we had a massive population explosion. These soldiers came home and they began to reproduce. The price of cars became cheaper, so people were able to get from one part of the United States to the other a whole lot quicker. That's cool, DP. And but they would come together and build these big victory gardens. They'd have community events during the harvest where people would share. Like if I had more cucumbers and you had more tomatoes, we would trade. We'd help each other out. And sadly, in this day and age, that's the other thing is people are more inward looking, if you will, I guess. Or lack of trusting people. Any number of things can relate to it. That our population is so large, communities are not as tight as they once were, and we could go on the litany of things that have got us to where we're at today. But more so, I hit the nail on the head earlier. And one is many people have taken their eyes off of Jesus Christ. That's just my opinion now. There's some out there who might not, follow that, and if that's the case, they're entitled to their right to believe in what they believe. But when people say that the founding fathers weren't Christian, I'll argue to the day that the majority of them were, or they wouldn't have used the Bible as the guideline when writing the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights and all the other laws that have been put on the books. Whether you believe in God or not, the 10 Commandments is something we all should live by. But then that boils down to the whole, you can't tell me what to do. Well, okay. But stealing's still wrong. Jealousy is still wrong. Coveting is still wrong. We going down a whole line list of other things. So that's why I always tell people, whether you believe in God or not, 10 Commandments is a good way to live by. And our government has allowed that to not happen. Our government has allowed that to go the way of the dodo, if you will, I guess you could say. But anyway. We've been at this for about 55 minutes tonight, folks. Has anybody got any closing thoughts they'd like to share before we cut this thing out for tonight? I might have to start inviting some people to come up on the live chat once I figure out how to do that on the software. Anybody? Well, if nobody's got anything else they want to add for tonight in the side chat, normally we go about an hour and 10 minutes. We're going to kind of DP, anytime. You be safe too, my friend. Thank you for dropping in, and then thank you for chatting. What you got, Warsaw? What's your question, brother? Wait for him to populate his question, and we'll close it out. I hope everybody enjoyed the poetry. Like I said, we'll be back again next Monday at 7 o'clock live. I hope everybody's enjoying this little session we're having on Monday nights. Yeah, I actually have Warsaw. It's a pretty good movie. Pretty good movie. I actually enjoyed it. Thank you, Walter. Appreciate that, my friend. Thank you, New York. Appreciate it, Luke. You be safe at work on Thanksgiving. And tell the rest of the family we said hello. Yeah, and it's been a while since I've watched it. But yeah, it was a good movie. Real good movie. But folks, I appreciate everybody that dropped in tonight. Thank you for your comments on the side chat. We had a lot of good talk over there. I don't know what we'll talk about next week after we read poems, but I'm sure we'll have a grand old time of it. If you like this channel and you haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button. We'd appreciate you to do that. But also invite somebody else that you know would enjoy the reading of some poetry and patriotic talk to come with you next Monday at 7 o'clock. And right back at you, my brother. Right back at you, Warsaw. And we shall see you next Monday at 7 p.m. Again, charities I'd ask you to help out if you can. Pen Up for Vets, Ballot for Veterans, tunnelsfortowers.org, and Folds of Honor. They're all charities that support veterans and their families. They can't do it by themselves. So if you feel you can help out, they would appreciate it. I'd appreciate it. And until next Monday, God bless. Take care. Stay tuned for tomorrow's video. I will be doing my regular regular Tuesday morning video on the way to work. So be on the lookout for that to pop up. Make sure you hit the notification button so you get notified when it's done. So until then, until tomorrow, God bless. Take care and good night to all. Soul Soldier out.